Hey there, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Live Without Training Wheels show. I'm your host, Lena Sutherland, owner and author at Homeschooling Without Training Wheels, mother to 8 kiddos, ages teen to toddler. And as you can see, this evening, I'm delighted to be joined by Julie Bogart of Brave Writer. Julie is the popular voice of common sense and compassion for home educators, her online coaching community, the Homeschool Alliance, and her podcast and her YouTube channel are lifelines for tens of thousands of weary homeschoolers all over the world, self included. Julie is the creator of the award-winning innovative online writing program called Brave Writer and the fast-growing weekly habit called Poetry Tea Time. She home educated her 5 children who are now globe-trotting adults. And today, Julie lives in Cincinnati, Ohio, and can be found sipping a cup of tea, planning her next visit to one of her lifelong learning kids. I just love that bio. I love that.
Thank you.
So for those of you who are joining me this evening, as usual, feel free to chat over in the comments over on the site. It's never a distraction. It's always fun to see your interactions. And we will just, as we have a chance, take a breath and wrap in whatever comments you've got there. Even if we don't get to it right when you drop it, please don't feel like it's an interruption. And then down at the bottom, right below our faces, there's an ask a question box. We've already got a couple of questions, so drop in your questions. And after Julie and I chat for a little bit, we'll take a look at those and answer any questions that you've got now or as we go through our talk for this evening. So, Julie, on our private online group, the Homeschooling Without Training Wheels Network, we've been spending the month of, what month is this? October. We've been spending the month of October talking about writing. And we had
Wonderful.
an online chat where we discussed, just some ins and outs of teaching writing and the homeschooling. And so some of the things that I've got to ask you arose out of that discussion and, questions that moms were asking or kind of aha moments that we were having that we wanted your added insight on.
Wonderful.
One of the things that we've got is we've got a brand new mom in our group. And like a lot of homeschool moms, she was a former teacher. And so she's going through that phase of deschooling, not just for her child, but also for herself. And, kind of rethinking like, what am I supposed to do here with writing? How am I supposed to set up expectations? Her child is early elementary. So I was wondering if you could just kind of give us, what is your best gold nugget advice for those moms who are, kind of trying to take a step back from an overly schooly mindset into a homeschool writing environment?
Yeah. So one of the things I love to share, and by the way, I love being here, and you have just the most amazing voice over microphone. I love how you broadcast. So anyway, it's great to be here. And one of the things that I know about writing in my own life and in my family's life and in the lives of those that we work with is that it functions best when it starts as an extension of speech. So a lot of times how we think of writing is something that happens, with a pen on a piece of paper. But writing is not transcription. Transcription is simply a written record of what someone wants to communicate. The writing life starts inside. It accesses whatever vocabulary is available for speech or thought, and that gets transcribed. So if you want to rejuvenate the writing life in your family, what you want to do is listen for what I would call a spontaneous act of self-expression. So a child who is, running inside after watching the dog chase the squirrel in the backyard, and you're busy stir-frying dinner, this child's going to run up to you and say, Mom, guess what happened with Rocky? And the moment you notice sort of that white-hot streak of passionate speech, grab a pen, the back of a piece of scratch paper or an envelope, and start jotting it down. Allow your child to experience the idea that what lives inside is worthy of the paper, deserves to be transcribed. That's the beginning of connection between what I have to say and why I would write it. Too often we skip that sort of vital step and we go straight to writing, and the child doesn't know yet to value what's going on inside their minds, inside their bodies. So that's how I would start.
Yeah, absolutely. The mom who asked about this said that that's exactly what had happened to her son in school. It was like the moment he could form letters on paper, it was like, okay, now write a paper about your whatever, and then he just kind of came out of school like, I hate writing. I'm not good at that. I don't want to do that. And so now she's trying to figure out, like, he has lots to say, but there's this barrier there that she's trying to overcome.
Correct. And part of it is because writing has two functions. There's the mechanics, or what we call the transcription skills, and then there's original thought. And for most of us, we are fluent in English by age 5. So we can speak very articulately. We have great vocabularies. We have sentence variety. We have complicated verb structures. And yet we are brand new to reading. You know, at age 5, it's very rare that you have a child who's a fluent reader. And even by age 8, even if you are so-called fluent, you certainly aren't fluent in spelling, punctuation, and the nuances of grammar and transcription, handwriting. So what we're asking is for our children to use their absolutely fluent native speaker English in transcription. And that creates a logjam in the brain. The brain can work at, perfectly organized pace for speech, but has to go much slower, like glacially slower for transcription. And so when those two meet, it creates this paralysis for the child. And they just have two choices. One is dumb down the content so that what they transcribe, they can write easily. So suddenly they go from this nice complex sentence about roller coasters to I love roller coasters, right? Something they can spell and remember while they're handwriting. Or they're going to forget about spelling and punctuation and write it however it comes to mind, all lowercase, no periods, maybe misspelling some words, so that they can capture the genuine vocabulary that they have to express. What ends up happening in school is they get graded down for both those options. So they're either graded harshly on content if they have accurate mechanics, or they're graded harshly on mechanics if they have good content. At home, you don't have to make that triage. You don't have to make that choice. You can allow them to self-express without attention to mechanics during those early years when they're just learning how to write, or you can transcribe it for them.
Yeah, I feel like, my answer to moms in this situation is like, you've already done the most important step. You've opened up this wide world of possibility just by homeschooling, just by choosing to have them at home. And now there are so many different ways you can
truly
be flexible with that. So we also, I think I shared a little video that you had done about free writing. And so some moms who have used other writing programs or just kind of done their own thing were curious about free writing from your perspective. How is free writing different than just like, say, a daily journal prompt?
Such a great question. I get that question a lot, actually. They're not really different, to be honest. The difference with a journal prompt, though, I would say, is that it doesn't always feel free. So a child might feel that there is an expectation that it represents something from their day. One of my favorite problems that I used to encounter in the early years of Brave Writer is parents would come and say, oh, yes, I make my child write every day right after breakfast. And then they complain that there's nothing to write. And I would say, well, let's just think about that. All they've done so far is they've gotten out of bed, they've put on some clothes, and they've eaten Cheerios. So even if you say to them, well, you can write about yesterday, for a child, one night's worth of sleep is an Etch-a-Sketch. Yesterday is long gone. They don't remember what happened. So you ask them to write first thing in the morning, and there's just isn't enough to say about the day yet. So if we're going to free write in the morning as opposed to journal, at least we're opening the possibility of writing about things that have nothing to do with the Dear Diary kind of entry that's focused on the life I'm living. The second thing is daily journaling implies that a child is generating writing from scratch every single day. And I think that's too taxing for most people, not just children, but like literally most humans. I find it challenging to write original writing from scratch that I feel good about and want someone else to read every day. And I am a professional writer.
Yeah.
So the writing myth that you should write every day, I like to reinterpret for children, and I say, engage writing every day. Listen to it being read. Read a little. Copy some of it. Use dictation. Original write. Do some revision. Every day you can engage with writing in one of those ways, but trying to do that original upchucking from inside every single day, that's really challenging. So for free writing, we recommend it like weekly, whereas daily writing prompts sound daily to me. And I some kids would love it. I mean, I was a kid who would have loved that, but not many do. They need a little space and time in between that original writing impulse.
Okay. And that helps. Another concern that one of the moms expressed is that, when I said, what's frustrating for you about teaching writing? And one of the responses was that it's so kind of nebulous. Like, how do I evaluate this? It's not like checking the math problems where, I have this answer key and this one's right and this one's wrong. So first of all, it's kind of a two-part question. One, how do we evaluate? And then two, how do we, so it's not just like, is this good or bad, or is this right or wrong, but also how do we kind of scale our evaluations based on the child in front of us and their past history and abilities and that kind of thing?
So the first thing I recommend is that we separate how we evaluate writing. In school, they tend to bring mechanics and original content together, and either of those can influence the overall grade. So you might have great content, bad mechanics, you're going to get a lower grade. And the same is true in the reverse. At home, you do not have to do that. So the place to begin is always with content. Do not start with the mechanics. Children want to be heard, just like you do. If you make some Facebook post and you inadvertently use a homonym like HEAR instead of HERE, you don't want someone to point out that you used the wrong word when you're trying to make a point that you want someone to understand. Similarly, with children, when their mechanics are still in that growing process where they're not fluent, they are taking a risk to share their interior with you. So the place you begin is thanking them for doing it, noticing that it's a risk, and finding something about the content to admire. I recommend things like good vocabulary, maybe the fact that they know the subject really well, maybe their sense of humor, maybe the fact that they told the whole detailed story and you were able to follow it. Perhaps they wrote for 4 whole minutes and you have never seen them do that. So find a way to validate the risk and the self-expression first. And yes, it is subjective. We write for readers, which is a subjective risk. I wrote a book recently. I'm hoping the reader will like it, right? It's a subjective thing, even if it's perfectly edited. I have yet to receive a single review on Amazon that says, masterful use of commas. Nobody has said that yet. And yet all the commas are correct.
Okay, I'm going to go write an Amazon review after this.
I would love to have that in an Amazon review. I think that would be hilarious. My audience would get it. So the point I'm trying to make is this. It is subjective by design. It's not like writing isn't supposed to be subjective. So start there. Start with your subjective appreciation of who your child is, the risk they took, and what you see showing up in that writing that impressed you or moved you or tickled you. Okay. But then, of course, you're thinking, but then how do we grow the writing? Like, let's say my child wrote about roller coasters without much detail. I love roller coasters. They're super fast. I went with my friend. I want to go again. I love roller coasters. And you're thinking, my gosh, this child knows them backwards and forwards. Where is all that detail? How do we grow that? Well, what we do next is we ignore the fact that there is no detail, and we ignore any missing punctuation, poor spellings, and we dive into what we know to be true. This child loves roller coasters. In Brave Writer, when we teach writing in our classes, we have a practice that we teach all of our instructors. So I'm going to give it to you now. This is a secret that you can use with all of your writing instruction. These 3 words. Tell me, let's see. It's 4 words. Tell me more about. So your child has said, I love roller coasters. Tell me more about your love of roller coasters. Tell me more about the speed of those roller coasters. Ask for more. Start with the idea that what they've offered is just the beginning. Not that it's inadequate, but that it's actually the treasure map that is going to lead you to the more they have to offer. Most kids are so flooded when they go to write that it's like they're taking shorthand notes on the volume that's in their brains. So what I used to do with my kids, if they said something like, I love roller coasters or I love ballet, I would get out a clipboard and a piece of paper and I'd say, all right, tell me more about what you love about ballet. And then they would say, well, all my best friends are there. Oh, your best friends, what are their names again? And you start showing them how to do the self-inquiry that enriches that original content. We get to the point where she says, she loves dancing. Which positions did you guys practice this time at ballet? And you write that down. Oh, what color were her slippers? Didn't she wear black ones? And yours are pink. Let's put that down. Was it Mary who wears the black ones? And you start showing her how to bring that richness to her writing. You take the notes. Then maybe a day later, you come back with the original, with the notes, and you start asking, where do we want to put this? And maybe you're sitting at the computer and sort of merging. It's almost like a patchwork quilt. You're merging this new content with the original, and you're showing her how to create this tapestry. What we tend to think is a child writes a draft, and the only thing to do to it is to get a thesaurus to change a couple of words, and we fix the punctuation and spelling. And the writing doesn't grow. Writing grows when we walk away from it and we interrogate the original with love. It's not a torture chamber, but you are going to sort of rip it apart and deepen the insight.
Yeah, I love that. So there's appreciation for what's there, but that doesn't have to truncate the opportunity for growing and expanding.
Exactly. In fact, in Brave Writer, the way we express it is like this: narrow the focus, expand the writing. So you're just going to pick one idea. Don't fix everything. Start with one idea. Oh, she seems interested in the performance part of the ballet experience. Let's narrow our focus now on the sentences about that, and let's ask better questions and draw out more detail. And then that expands the writing.
Interrogate the original with love. Yep.
Yes.
Love that. Love that. Yeah. If you guys hear like quotes that you're like, ooh, I love that, just write it down, because then we have this written record right here in our Crowdcast of those gold nuggets that we're going to want to remember. Okay. So this goes along the same lines, Julie, as what we were just talking about, we're evaluating, we're helping them to grow. Okay. So one of the things that was kind of mind-blowing to me about Brave Writer was, not everything that they write is going to become a finished product, which it's one of those things that's like so obvious when you think about it, but nobody had said that to me before. Like, my son is an artist. Very, very few of his sketches ever make it into something that he would hang up on the wall. Like, most of them go in a folder or in the trash or, whatever. He just, and my daughter knits, and a lot of what she does is just like, I'm going to try out this new stitch and blah, blah, blah. And then I'm going to toss it because I have like oodles of yarn from every elderly person who ever heard that a 13-year-old knits, and will hand down yarn to her. Right. And so in every other area of life, I'm totally used to my children doing lots of stuff that never goes anywhere. But somehow in writing, I thought everything was supposed to end up as something. So all that to say, okay, so we get that we don't have to do like a writing project a week. But when we do get to the place where we say, okay, this is great, we love it, we're going to take it, and give it a little TLC, and we're going to bring it to a finished product. But if you have a third grader, it's, at least for me as a mom, it's hard to know, like, when is it finished? Because it's still a third grade paper. So how do I know when to say, cool, you're done?
Decide that in advance. Decide that in advance. Here's how I do it. I would decide that we would only revise 1 or 2 items in any paper. That's it. It does zero good, actually, to correct any spelling or punctuation in a paper. You can fix it. I'm all for fixing it, but don't correct it. In other words, you want your child to bring their current set of skills to bear on their writing. So let me give you a full set of process for one paper. Okay. So your child picks a topic like ballet. So now you're going to free write on the first day, set the timer and say, okay, let's write everything you can think of about ballet. So your child now writes for 3 minutes and she's got a little paragraph about ballet. 2 days later, you're going to come back to this paragraph and read it with her. She could read it aloud to you. I highly recommend that. And then you're going to zero in on 1 or 2 aspects that you can grow from that paragraph. So maybe you notice that she's really interested in the costumes that they were all wearing, each child in a different outfit. So you go through and you talk to her about them. And she says, well, they're wearing pink. What kind of pink? Well, I don't know. Okay, so you go get your crayon box and you find there's carnation, there's pale, there's bubblegum, and you pick a word from the box. So now she's got bubblegum pink tutus on 2 of her friends, and one friend has black slippers, and you're writing this all down. And then 2 days later, you come back to it again and you pick one other aspect. And maybe this time you notice that she gets you all the way to the performance, but she ran out of steam in that first free write. So you set the timer and you say, okay, on a separate sheet of paper, free write about the performance, totally away from the original. And now she's going to free write again. So now you've got a free write about the costumes. You've got some detail you added through conversation. Now you have a second free write about the performance. Over a period of 2-3 weeks, you can bring these together. You can talk to her about sequences. One of the things we recommend in Brave Writer is the parent type all that up, triple space, and cut up the sentences into strips. And then working like an architect or, a puzzle maker, you're going to reorganize these in new, possibly pleasing ways. We usually recommend doing violence to the original, so making it make no sense originally, and then starting over. Because sometimes the best sentences are in the middle when they were in their flow, and those can be moved to the top. So as you are thinking about writing, in other words, you are not thinking about how to make this a better paper. You're thinking about how your child can become more comfortable expanding and growing the writing. So only pick 1 or 2 ideas, expand those either through dialogue with you or more free writing, cut them up, move them around into a new order, then print it out. Now, never fix the spelling or punctuation at this point. Take a week off, give that paper back to your child with their own pen. And here's what I love to say to my kids. Go through this paper now and make sure you like all of your spelling and punctuation choices. Now, I like that language better than fix all your mistakes. Can you see the obvious reason why? Occasionally, a child will deliberately misspell, use a punctuation mark in an unconventional way, decide not to capitalize when you think they should, and they will even have a reason for it. So we want to give them full ownership, and they are going to bring to bear the skills they have. Will they miss some things? Yes, because they're not fluent yet. But if you go in and tell them what they did wrong, they aren't going to learn it anyway. So here's what they do. They go in, they fix what they can, and then you, at the end, read it to yourself, and you make either a mental note or a real note of where they are still needing to grow in mechanics, and you target those in copy work and dictation. If you want to share this with grandma or publish it on your blog, you go in like a copy editor at a publishing house and you fix everything they missed. You don't tell them. You don't have a conversation about it. You just fix it because she's not going to retain it. There's this pair of researchers who did a long longitudinal study of teacher comments on student papers. And they proved after a year of working with these teachers that there wasn't a single improvement on any subsequent paper by any student in a year.
Wow.
Because who was proving that they understood punctuation? The teacher. Does the student go back and read what the teacher did and suddenly understand it? They do not.
Yeah.
The only way they grow that skill is if you work on it and target it using someone else's writing, not their own. So to recap, occasionally when you take a paper from soup to nuts, you pick 1 or 2 things to fix and you use it to expand and enrich content. You let the child test their growing mechanics skills by editing their own paper, and then you're done. That's it.
That sounds doable.
It is doable. And you don't have to ask your child to copy it over. Like a lot of parents say, I want my child to copy it over. Those days are gone. We have computers for a reason. That's torture for everyone. It doesn't improve anybody's handwriting. All it does is make miserable people. I remember doing a report with Johanna, she's my second child, in 7th grade on India. And we threw a party about India. We did research for months. She finally wrote the paper on a yellow legal pad. We did exactly what I'm talking about. We enriched it. We expanded it. We got it finished. And I still have it. It's got little asterisks and extra pages. Go to letter A where this other paragraph should be. And that's as far as we ever got. And I remember at the time almost feeling guilty about it. And then I thought, why? We're at home. She got everything she needed to out of this paper. So the next one, maybe we'll have more stamina to actually type it up and make it look pretty. You are growing over a series of papers. You don't have to have all the growth happen in one paper.
I love that. I love that. And why not? I mean, you've got time. You've got the long term.
And she was tired. We had done it for a long time.
So one of the chats we were having in our online community, we were musing that perhaps in some ways writing is kind of like potty training. Like you can try and do it really early and it will be painful for everyone. Or you can just wait until they're a little older, developmentally or, chronologically older, and they will catch on quicker and with less pain. So I'm curious if you think that's generally true. And then the mom brain is always saying, but what if? What are the what ifs that we should be careful about with the philosophy of just wait, just keep waiting and keep waiting?
So the waiting model makes it sound like writing is something your child does, and that's not how I see it. So the way I see it is your child self-expresses and is in search of a transcriptionist. So where we want to start with is that self-expression. So like when Liam was 4 years old, he's my fourth child, he made these little Lego men, and they all had names and superpowers because he was into Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! And one day he kept explaining who they were and what their superpowers were, and there's no way I could remember. And so I grabbed a clipboard. By the way, clipboards, key tool in homeschooling and writing. I grabbed a clipboard and I said to him, okay, tell me what this guy is. Tell me what this guy is. And I just jotted it all down for him. And wouldn't you know, he carried that around for a month. Every single day, he would show it to someone and he would put the little man and set him on top of the definition. And that became his vehicle of writing. So even though he couldn't read yet or move a pencil, he had already become a writer in his own mind. So to me, weirdly, my kids did potty train somewhat early, but I always credited it with cloth diapers because they could feel the wetness. And I think that the parallel for me here would be help your child feel like a writer at an early stage. Let them discover that their words have so much value. They need to be jotted down and shared with an interested audience. Now, in terms of transcription, start with a big arm, use whiteboards, chalkboards, sidewalk chalk, writing on a big piece of butcher paper that you stick on the wall. Help them experience the power of making marks on things without tiny little letters on a sheet of paper. So that they start to experience the pleasure of using their body to transcribe. One thing I noticed with some of my kids is Katrin, my youngest, for instance, she wrote long before she could read. And she truly believed that she was writing. She was thinking thoughts and she was moving this pencil. And she even would say to us things like, don't read this, it's secret. We really couldn't. Yeah. But what I noticed is her older siblings were so in the habit of free writing, and we had transcribed for her so much that she understood the relationship between her hand and her brain. So I think that's really what our goal is. We're trying to help them have the connection. And whether we do it for them or we allow them to discover it for themselves, that's the goal. And yes, I mean, the perfect cursive or perfect manuscript, that can take time. Liam was dysgraphic. He went 3 years without writing at all, actually. And I did it all for him, including math. So, so a hybrid of what you said, I think.
Okay, that makes sense.
That makes sense.
So let's go ahead and talk about some of these questions that folks have asked down here at the bottom. The first one, I think, I'm going to read it over. I think we might have already kind of touched on it right at the beginning, so you can toss in extra thoughts if you have them. But Rita says, one of my boys, almost 8 years old, fights any writing request, though can do it by himself in a very reasonable time once he decides to do it. Our online program has daily grammar practice that he finds, quote, not hard, as well as a brief daily writing prompt. I experimented with different times of day when to complete these assignments, offered different writing utensils too. He likes to read. How can I help him overcome his deep dislike of writing? So
I would back off of the physical writing right now. He needs to experience being an author, not having to write. Like, try and think of it this way. There are transcriptionists and there are writers, there are authors. So let's help our kids have an experience of being an author rather than the hard work of being a secretary. That's the difference here. And right now, we tend to conflate those. And so our kids tell us they don't think they're writers or they hate writing because they don't like being a secretary. But they all have ideas they want to communicate. And let me tell you, if you jot down what they say, like spontaneously, like the little boy who came in talking about the dog, and then that night, pull that sheet of paper out and sit at the dinner table and read it to the family, your child will be blown away. And you'll be shocked at how much pride they feel that you valued what they had to share so much. You wrote it down and read it to the family. And I often recommend tossing that into the library basket and then reading it on a repeated basis over the next, few weeks, because that's what helps them connect to the writer that they can become. These rote lessons of grammar and doing the daily handwriting may actually create damage, and it's harder to overcome damage. We can do it in Brave Writer, but I always say I'd rather you neglect them than damage them. That is good to know.
Yeah. All right. So let's see. Our next question is from Sarah. She says, at what age does it make sense to start learning formats like essays, and what is too young?
High school. So in Brave Writer, we wait until 9th grade. And the reason is the brain has to go through a chemical wash where the child moves from sort of a pure logic-based system to a rhetorical way of thinking, which means basically being able to hold two opposing views in your brain at once dispassionately, which is a struggle even for teens, but they are just at the beginning stages of being able to do that. Essay writing, the way it's taught in elementary school and junior high, is not essay writing. It is 5-paragraph writing. Essays in the academic world take positions, use citations and research in order to expose, expository writing, expose a course of study. When we ask a 7th grader to write an essay, all they're doing is reporting, and they're putting it in 5 paragraphs. They are not yet taking that argumentative position or exploring and comparing and contrasting and doing sort of the academic research. So we save that for high school. And if you teach your kids in the methods I'm talking about, they are more than ready for it then, and they do quite well.
Love it. Yep. I remember listening to you talk about teaching essay writing on a napkin, on the back of a napkin.
The format is not difficult. The reason that kids find it difficult is they have not yet cultivated a writing voice, and they haven't been trained in the skills of rhetorical thinking, of research. One of the things that I love to point out about Brave Writer, but parents don't often know, is that even our youngest stage of development, the jot it down stage before the child is using a pen, is preparing them for college. For instance, our very first project in our product called Jot It Down is a fairy tale project. What do we ask our students to do? Well, first, we ask them to pick a fairy tale and then read a diverse range of fairy tale representations of that story. So you might read Cinderella in the Disney version. You might read the Chinese Cinderella story. You might read the French Cinderella story. You might watch the Disney movie. You might then watch the movie that is, a reinterpretation, live action version. And all of these Cinderellas slowly find their way into your child, where they are now doing this internal compare and contrast and distillation of the essential pieces that make it a Cinderella story. Then we ask them to narrate that visually and in words that you will transcribe for them to create their own account. In college, any class you take in the humanities or social sciences asks you to do the same thing. You're looking at the theme of the Civil War. You're going to read a diversity of points of view about that one aspect. You're going to take those inside of yourself and develop an interpretation and a point of view that are merged with your own identity and your own understanding. And then that gets represented in writing or an oral presentation or a PowerPoint or some version, a test. That's all academics are. It's this ability to take and internalize and then reflect back what you've learned. So in Grave Writer, that is exactly what we do, but we start with what makes sense for that level, and each stage of development grows those capacities. So there's no, okay, we fall off a cliff in 8th grade and now we're doing this hard work of academic work. Kids who've started with us, they move into that very neatly, very easily.
Love it. Love it. Okay. So Lainey, who was part of the conversation that we had about the potty training, she said, she's correcting my memory. She said, Lynna, I think that's the distinction we were making with the potty training analogy, that the writing essays at a young age is really just reporting information.
Exactly.
Not giving original thought about that content. So yes.
That's it.
Thank you. Yes. Not thinking as fast on my feet tonight. All right. Let's see. Okay. Erica says, I have a child who loves to write stories, but she will have this deep passion to start and write a ton of pages, but then she loses steam and never finishes her story. I try to encourage her to finish the story because I'm so excited to hear, but she just won't. Should I let it go? Celebrate what she does give? She's only 10.
So you want to know if you should get her to finish the stories? Is that the basic gist of that question? Do you think,
it
Lynna?
sounds like it. What should she do with that? She starts with a big passion and she writes a bunch and then it kind of peters off.
All right. So the way that I think about interest-led or passion-based writing is the same way you might think about dress-up clothes and face paints. So imagine your child is super excited about Robin Hood. You've read the book and now they bought the cape and they have the little hat, and every day, he gets outside and he starts playing Robin Hood. And then it's time for lunch and you call him in and he comes in and eats lunch. There's never a day where you're thinking to yourself, I wonder if he started at the beginning and finished the whole story. You don't ever watch him and think, oh, he's leaving out a big chunk, or gosh, he never gets to the end, because you see it as play and he's just going to represent the most exciting parts of the story in his action. Story writing, passion-led writing is the same way for students. They are using the tool, the toy called a pen and paper or a computer and iPad to represent a fantasy that lives in their brains. They are putting on the dress-up clothes of typing. And instead of acting it out, they are letting themselves live the imagined storyline in their brain. Irrelevant. Completely irrelevant, because now that's asking them to do a task, but they're not doing a task. They're playing. So what they're doing is they're finding that portion of the story that is really meaningful to them, and they're going into the deep dive and they're having the full endorphin release, right? Oh my gosh, I got to think about it in lots of detail and inhabit that moment. And then once that feeling releases, they're done. They don't have any interest in the hard work of tying up loose ends or bringing it to a conclusion. So my advice with passion-led writing is let it live the same way you let them play in the backyard. It's the same thing. You can just enjoy it. You don't have to do anything with it. It's doing all its own work without your help. It's the best thing ever. Just let it be.
Love that. All right. Let's see. Rach says, love the language you're using, Julie, growing, enriching. And do you like your spelling choices? I'm going to try these. These are really helpful tips. My son hasn't done writing of his own since he left public school in England in January. Where do I start getting him? I'm sorry, I lost my place. Where do I start getting him to write again? He had huge anxiety over writing, lots of checklists and marking his writing in school. He's 8 and a very good reader, but struggles to think of his sentences.
Great. So just jot it down. Listen to him and write down his words. Don't ask him to do any handwriting. He's 8. He's very young. It takes 10 years to become a fluent transcriptionist, from 8 to 18. So pretend he is a newborn and is just learning to eat. Would you hand him a fork and a knife? You would breastfeed him. You would do the whole thing. You would generate the milk. You would bring him to your breast and you would let him suck. That's you. You have a pen. You are handwriting everything for him and you are helping him rediscover the joy of self-expression. And for now, you can even tell him, oh, sweetheart, don't even worry about all that other stuff. We'll get there when you're ready. And I would do things like draw pictures, leave him Post-it notes, put notes to him on the mirror while he's taking a bath. One thing I have recommended many times is when your child's asleep, Fill the door with Post-it notes from you to him. The weather the next day, funny knock-knock jokes, quotes about his favorite stuff, little love messages. Just fill the whole door with funny things, funny words, and then leave a stack of Post-it notes and a pen at the bottom and say nothing. See what happens. See if he writes notes back to you. See if he ignores it. Doesn't matter what he does. Don't look for a reaction. Start to use writing in meaningful ways around your child that is you taking on the responsibility, and allow him to have the pleasure and joy of being around writing without having to produce any of it.
Mm-hmm. That just sounds fun. Let's see. Lainey says, would you let free writing be optional? And at what point would you recommend making it mandatory?
So in my family, those words were sort of not relevant, optional and mandatory. Let's reframe the language a little bit. How about an invitation? How about extending invitations? One of the dangers when I hear optional and mandatory is it sounds like we're doing free writing to our kids. But in Brave Writer, we recommend that you free write as well. So what would happen if on a Friday, let's say you've had breakfast and you got up and you got a sheet of paper and a pen and you set the timer and you sat down and you started free writing and you said nothing? When your kids ask you what you were doing, and you could say, shh, I'm busy, I'm trying to write the whole time before this timer goes off. I'm going to see how much I can get on this sheet of paper before the timer goes off. So don't bother me. We need to create more of a context that is interesting, that shows adults actually living the values we say we want our children to have. Invitation can do all the work if you let it. And I don't mean invitation like, hey, come to the table and do free writing. I mean, leading by modeling. Maybe free writing is the fun day where there are always cookies, or you're going to sit under the table instead of at the table and write on clipboards, or you're going to go to Panera and write while you have hot chocolate. Create an environment that invites a child's participation more than deciding whether it's optional or mandatory. Now, you can set up a routine. We used to free write every Friday, but I free wrote as well. It was just a family thing. Katrin, who could not read until she was 9, she did free writing with us every week. She just filled it up. For a while it was scribbles, then it became capital letters, then eventually it was clusters of capitals, then it started to have lowercase, just like that. Somebody's asking, what about teenagers who think it's the worst idea ever? So maybe begin by typing, not handwriting. Maybe begin by texting. So you text them a prompt and they write back, and they text you one. Go out for coffee and discuss how they see the role of writing in their lives. My boys really loved posting on Reddit subthreads. That was a place that was fun writing for them, or in online chats for their gaming. Get outside the box. You know, teens need risk and adventure and something that feels real. Where can they self-express in writing that doesn't feel like they're just doing it for the same old mother they've had their entire 15 years?
All right. We've got one more from Marianne. Marianne says, my 12-year-old son is profoundly dyslexic with dysgraphia. Up to this point, we've only done narration with him speaking and me typing or writing. What would you recommend as a Brave Writer product to start the process of adding more structure to his writing instruction?
So Brave Writer has online classes, and the one I would recommend is called The Writer's Jungle Online. It is built from my primary tool, the manual called The Writer's Jungle. It enrolls you, the parent, with your child, and our instructors will give you processes that you can use with your own child to ensure growth. We work with kids who have dyslexia all the time. The instructor whose specialty is that dyslexia is Deb Bell, B-E-L-L. So if you want extra help, she'd be a good instructor, even though all of our teachers have been taught how to work with kids, but she actually has that as a specialization. So I would start with that class if you're looking to grow that original writing piece with a child who's struggling with that. The second thing I would recommend, though, is if you want help with dyslexia for reading and the physical act of writing, check out my colleague Rita Savasco. She has a company called rootedinlanguage.com, and she offers webinars and tools that address the dyslexia in a therapeutic way. So my class focuses on original writing and very, very powerful. Rita endorses it for sure. She used to work for me. Now she's got her own company and she does additional stuff that you can use to help you with the dyslexia.
Excellent. Okay. So Marianne says, thank you. I've been talking with Rita. Julie, I don't know if you know Marianne, but Marianne Sunderland is the owner and author of Homeschooling with Dyslexia. And she
fabulous.
says she's been talking with Rita. So that sounds like
fabulous.
they're already in touch.
I love it.
Rachel says, thank you for the fun ideas. Julie, love the Post-it note idea and the writing down their play on a clipboard. I love that too. Especially the little Lego people. That made me think of a couple of people, particularly in our homeschool. All right. Well, we have answered all the questions that we've got here. I couldn't really decide. I have this little, one button that I get to put at the bottom of the screen. And I was trying to think like, what's a good encapsulating thing? So what I've done is I've just provided you a link over to this lovely page full of illustrations where Julie's described the natural stages of writing growth. And I think that's a great way. If you kind of want to like, okay, help me get the big picture and then zoom in on where we are, that's a good place to start. But then, of course, there are a lot of resources available. So, Julie, would you just give us a little overview, because a first-time Brave Writer browser might be like, what are all these different pieces and how do they fit together? Can you give us the quick overview version?
Yes. So if you are thinking about writing the way I was describing it, as mechanics being one aspect, original thought being another, you work on those simultaneously but distinct from each other. So the way we work on mechanics is we teach you using a novel like Charlotte's Web, and we do copy, work, and dictation drawn from that, and then we discuss grammar, spelling, punctuation. So that's the way we do mechanics. Then over on original writing, we use my book called The Writer's Jungle, which teaches the parent how to be a writing coach to the child. There are processes in each chapter. You're going to go one chapter at a time. Do not feel you need to read the whole book to get started. You start with chapter 1 and you go one chapter at a time. And then the third item that is in sort of our a writing community of products is writing projects. I actually happen to have partnership writing right here. And what that does is it brings the mechanics and original thought together to create a writing project. You're used to covering all of writing. It's just we've divided them into 3 pieces because what we've discovered is if we just say write a report and you have a child who struggles with spelling or you have a child who doesn't feel confident in self-expression, that report is not going to get written. So we help them grow in mechanics, we help them grow in original thought, and then we bring those together with developmentally appropriate writing projects. And if you buy something that is scaled to their development, you'll have all 3 of those products working together. I was telling Lena before we went on the air, we are having a Black Friday sale. So if you're interested in that, I'll let you know that in advance. And I'm sure Lena will have lots of detailed links on her website if you need to know how to shop.
Yep. I'll be sure to share that with you guys when the time comes. That's pretty much the best deal all year is to take advantage of that opportunity. So okay. Well, Julie, thank you so much for being with us this evening. It is always helpful. We were talking about this before we went live. Like even the questions from folks who are new to thinking about this is always helpful to all of us to just kind of get a refresher and a reminder of like what we're doing, why we're doing it, and especially to just kind of re-celebrate the freedom and the flexibility that we have in homeschooling. It's really a gift. It can be overwhelming, as the homeschool mom to feel like the buck stops with me. So it's helpful to kind of like flip it around and be like, but look at all the opportunity I have. Look at all the, privileges.
Oh, and that is especially true with writing. I mean, you get to do it in a way that no school does it, and it will yield the results that you yearn to see. And if you have any questions, we answer all of our emails in detail. So help@bravewriter.com. You can email us with questions. Follow me on Instagram. Julie Brave Writer is my Instagram handle. And we take all of your feedback and questions seriously. So thanks, awesome. Lena. You're awesome. Love your community.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, we got a couple more comments over here. Elizabeth says, Rita's stuff is great. eblareads.com is another great dyslexia resource. Christy says the breastfeeding analogy was the best. I feel so relieved about my 8-year-old. Turns out he's a newborn writer.
Exactly.
And Lainey says, thank you so much, Lynna and Julie. Love the ideas you've shared. Amen to that.
Fantastic.
So,
well, good.
Okay. Thanks
Have
all.
a great fall, everybody.